Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to design your work adventure. And there is never just one way or the right way or the only way. What matters is what works for you, right? What supports the life that you want to live. Whatever allows you to spend your time and attention on the people you love is good, right? That should be the litmus test for the work that you do. So if your job doesn't allow you to live the way you want to, or to spend your time with the people that you care about, then it's time to kind of reassess what that job is. So today we are going to talk about the differences and the similarities, the myths, the truths between working a full-time job for a company for somebody else or consulting, freelancing, or starting your own business. Like, what's the difference between those two? And no matter what path you take, right? Whatever you choose, understanding all of the path is going to help you make a more informed decision about what you choose to do. So, welcome back to Launch Your Business Live, where we make making money online clear, simple, and successful so you can build wealth and independence, work from home, and turn your part time business into your full time income. Now, my name is Marianne Lombardi. I'm the founder and CEO of Marianne Lombardi Coaching. I'm an author, a former educator, and the single parent of the coolest kid on the planet. And I've been helping small business owners thrive for 20 plus years, and my mission is to do the same for you. So let's get into this a little bit. When we break it down, there are two main categories for this conversation. There is working for someone else, or there is working for yourself, right? You're either employed by someone else or you are self employed. And the big difference between working for yourself or working for someone else really comes down to who has the control. Because when you work for a company in corporate or small business, or like many of you have as a teacher, the workplace culture, your pay and benefits, your time and attention, and your work product is in general structured and determined by somebody else, not by you. So you give up control of your time and attention, what you do, how much you make, who you spend your day with, whether that's virtual or in person. And in return, you get regular pay, a built in community, and the security of having your benefits structured and mostly about 75% paid for by your employer. So when the pay and benefits are good, when workplace culture is inclusive, if you feel safe, when you feel safe, and if there is this sense of belonging, and when the workload is either enjoyable and manageable, then this kind of environment can work really well, right? It can work great. The challenge comes when those things aren't true. And for many of teachers, especially in this case, the benefits are good, but the pay is not, depending on where you are regionally. The workplace culture in a lot of schools is in the shitter, right? And many just don't feel safe. And the workload, as we all know, is ridiculous and unsustainable, which takes teachers' time and attention away from their family and the things that they care about. So now, not all full-time gigs are going to be that way. There are some great companies to work for, but it is important. The reason I bring this up is it's important to know what you are giving up and what you are getting when you are making a decision to work for someone and work for yourself, which we're going to talk about. And it's important for you to ask good questions of your next employer to make sure that you know what you're getting into. So, in the working for yourself category, and this is like the self employed category, there are a handful of terms that come up that are similar, I mean similar things, but also are actually slightly different. So we're going to talk about them, like freelancing or independent contractor or consulting or being a fractional employee or starting your own business. They are all a different structure of relatively the same thing, which is self-employment. So let's talk about the similarities of those things. If you work for yourself, you're being hired to work part-time for someone else. In that arrangement, you have the flexibility to choose your product, your projects, and the people that you work for or the companies that you work for or work with. And you mostly control your time and attention depending on the kind of work that you choose to do. And depending on the work opportunity, you are sort of half in and half out of the workplace culture, right? Depending on who you're working for. Now, in some of the differences, we're going to break down what each of these terms actually mean and how they show up in the kind of work that you do. So let's talk about a freelancer. So as a freelancer, you're usually working on multiple short-term projects and you have very specific deliverables, right? Like you're hired to do a specific thing because you offer a specific skill that is needed by the company who is your client, right? And the projects that you're doing are usually overseen by someone who's going to direct what's needed from you and is going to give you feedback on that. And freelancers generally are not a part of a company or a business that's hired them because they're not permanent hires in any way. But the freelancer has full control of their schedule, right? And they may choose to work for multiple clients at one time. And these jobs are often really common in media and creative industries, right? Like you hear freelancers come up in a lot of those kind of industries. And they're different from, say, the independent contractors. Let's talk about that. So, an independent contractor, they're similar to freelancers, but they're not exactly the same because they have specialized skills like a freelancer and they're self-employed or sometimes they can work for an agency, right? Like they're in that weird space, not unlike fractional, which we'll talk about in a second. But you can be a self-employed independent contractor or you can work for an agency that places you with companies. And they usually work for one employer at a time, which is different from freelancers. But they're usually contracted for longer term projects with a defined time range. And a contract hire usually has set working hours and is contracted with one client, right? They're working with one client until they're done and then they work with another client. They're often found in IT and finance and health and construction. So the industries use different terms, whereas media might be looking for freelancers and not necessarily independent contractors as much. Your finance and IT industries are really looking for independent contractors. Okay. So let's talk about what a consultant is because this comes up a lot. As a consultant, again, you're like all of these are bringing a specific expertise, right? And as a consultant, you're bringing a specific expertise to a company. Now, you usually aren't the one who is executing on your ideas, right? Or creating a thing based on your ideas. Your job is to offer guidance, right? The client's going to give you a problem, not a set of tasks. You're not there to complete tasks. You're there to solve a problem. And you come in, your need is to come in and come up with a strategy, right, for solving said problem, whatever it is. So consultants are typically more of a senior level position and up, right? Their engagement lengths vary, but you're typically brought in for a specific project or a goal and can stay on retainer afterward. Once you give them that strategy, you may stay with them to follow that strategy through, give them guidance as somebody on the team is executing that strategy. Now, you're still in control of your time and attention, and you work when and for whom you choose. Now, a more common term these days, which used to not be as quite as common, is the fractional employee. Now, a fractional employee again offers a specialized service, right? They offer a niche or advanced experience, and they're usually working for several different employers during a work week doing the same kind of thing. Okay, so it's usually a senior position and you are hired for your specific expertise that you deliver, and you're as if you were a senior full-time employee, but you're not full-time, right? So you may have a fractional CFO, a chief financial officer, or you might have a fractional bookkeeper. Okay, so you have a very specific niche skill and you're hired for that as if you were a full-time employee, but you are not. You're part-time. And it's called fractional because you're working a fraction of the time a full-time employee would be. Now, the gig will usually have regular work hours, and the projects tend to be long term in nature because you're working on the entire finances of a company or bookkeeping for a company. And sometimes these gigs provide benefits depending on what the arrangement is and depending on the company. So it's kind of interesting that it has this sort of hybrid effect of being self-employed ish, and working for a company ish, right? The fractional does. So sometimes independent contractors and fractional employees work for agencies or employed by the company, but sometimes they're self-employed. Okay, so they can be a hybrid of that. All right. So we've touched on what a freelancer is. We've touched on what an independent contractor is. We've touched on what a consultant is. And we've touched on what a fractional employee. Now, all of these things fall in the category of working for yourself. The final one of these is obviously starting your own business, right? Because when you start a business, you usually start as someone who is self employed and you may create an LLC or some other business structure as you grow. But in the beginning, it's not necessary. You can do your business as self-employed for as long as you want. And as a business, you offer a service that helps people solve a problem, and your clients are happy to pay you to solve that problem for them. Okay. And as a freelancer, you're really doing roughly the same thing, right? Like you have a service, you provide it to a company that they can't do with an internal employee. So they pay you to do that work to solve that problem for them. Right. So all of these things are interwoven and they have a similar feeling and need, right? Like, but they all have different names and they kind of have different structures. But it all comes down to whether you're working for someone else, whether you're working for yourself. Okay. So let's talk about like two myths that I think are important. One of them is that full time employment is less risky. That's one we hear all the time, right? Of course, I need to get a full time job because it's less risky. Yes, ish, right? So there's this great article, and we'll post it in the comments from Forbes that outlines why 9 to 5 jobs are becoming less appealing. And a couple of the points that they include is that in the past 4 years, research shows that 11% more of full time workers say that they agree that independent work, which is this working for yourself, is more secure than full time work. And for many, traditional jobs are not as appealing as they were in the past because of corporate mergers and restructuring and layoffs and payroll cuts. It's just been more combustible and insecure as time has gone on, right? And so that security and attractiveness is going down for a lot of people. And independent work has become more common as work life balance and burnout continues to just get worse and worse. And technology improvements have been making it better and easier to do independent work. So it's this really interesting thing that's going on is that the security and the attractiveness of that full-time sort of corporate work seems to be waning more, and the independent work, because more people are doing it and because it's getting easier, is becoming a little bit more attractive. So it's just an interesting thing to keep an eye on. And the other thing that's important about independent work is that when we rely only on one source of income, it's a risky bet, right? When we only are working for one company and we have no other source of income, it is risky because if anything happens to that job, then you have nothing else to fall back on. And so often having an independent work opportunity allows you to diversify that income and to protect yourself if anything happens with your full-time job or if there is a family or medical emergency. So in and of itself, just one source of income, whether it's full-time or independent, can be a risky thing, right? So it's good to think about that when you're figuring out how to make up your work life. Another myth is that starting a business is complicated. Now, that's just not true. Starting a business can be challenging, but it's actually quite simple. And often the reason people think that starting a business is complicated is because one, they've never done it before, right? And most of the time when we haven't done anything before, we're like, whoa, shit, that's complicated. I don't know how to do that, right? So that makes perfect sense. Number two, they have seen other small business owners struggle and fail, and they're turned off by that, which again is totally understandable, right? Some businesses, a lot of businesses fail. And so it can make the idea of starting your own business really, really scary and insecure. The other is that they read all these 10 steps to start your business articles that are shitty, right? They're terrible. And they often tell people to do a bunch of things that you don't really need to do to start a business. So the reality is starting a business is simple. It can be challenging at times, but it is not actually that complicated. And the big picture to all of this is that you have a choice about what you choose to do for your work. You can work for yourself, you can work for somebody else, and you can do a combination of those two things. There are a lot of different ways to design your work adventure. There is not one way, there is not the right way, and there is not the only way. The only thing that matters is what works for you, what supports the life that you choose to live. So I hope that's helpful. I know it's a lot of words, right? But in the end, you're either working for somebody else or you're working for yourself. All right. So if you have any questions about what I've talked about, please reach out and I'm happy to, break it down any further. So anyway, good to see you and I'll see you next week.